Good afternoon, Your Honors. It is a great honor to have the opportunity to explain at this Pan-American Judges Summit why the world, particularly Latin America, and indeed the Church, need an International Anti-Corruption Court, or IACC. I am Mark Wolf, a senior United States District Judge in Massachusetts and the chair of Integrity Initiatives International, which we call III. III's mission is to strengthen the enforcement of criminal laws, to punish leaders who are corrupt and who regularly violate human rights, and to deter others who may be tempted to emulate their example. Our ultimate goal is to create opportunities for the democratic process to replace those kleptocrats, as corrupt leaders are coming to be called, with officials dedicated to serving their citizens rather than enriching themselves. Catalyzing a campaign for the International Anti-Corruption Court, which is now progressing at an accelerating rate, is central to III's mission. Grand corruption, the abuse of public office for private gain by a nation's leaders, flourishes in many countries. It's particularly pronounced, as you know, in Latin America, with the presidents of Argentina, Brazil, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Peru, and Mexico have been convicted or are being investigated for corruption. Grand corruption is not a victimless crime. As Pope Francisco has said, corruption is paid for by the poor. It is estimated that 5% of the world's gross domestic product is lost to corruption. The estimate is 10% in Mexico, where I was 2 weeks ago. This means that, as the Pope said in 2015, corruption steals from the sick and from hungry children because the money stolen was meant for them. Indeed, as the then United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said in 2013, corruption kills. The money stolen through corruption every year is enough to feed the world's hungry 80 times over. Corruption also kills in other ways. In 2014, 1/3 of the funds sent to combat Ebola in Sierra Leone could not be accounted for, although some were eventually found in the bank accounts of the officials responsible for administering the Ebola program. Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of the former president of Angola, is reportedly worth $3 billion, yet Angola has the highest percent of children who do not live to the age of 5 of any country in the world. And in Mexico, a governor who's recently fled the country is now accused of a corrupt scheme to replace chemotherapy for dying children with water. The Catholic Church has long been admirably and often courageously devoted to improving the plight of the most poor and powerless among us. Corruption, particularly grand corruption, is largely responsible for the unconscionable income inequality the Church confronts and a major impediment to redressing it. Grand corruption is also a considerable cause of the world migration crisis. Refugees are fleeing corrupt, failed states, including Venezuela, Libya, and Syria, among many others. Less evident, perhaps, is the fact that many highly skilled young people, like my III assistant, Julia Makiova of Belarus, feel compelled to leave corrupt countries that desperately need their talents because there are no honest opportunities for them at home. Grand corruption also threatens the future of the planet. In the final declaration of the 2017 Pontifical Academy of Sciences Summit on Climate Change, the delegates dedicated themselves to ending deforestation. That will be difficult because illicit trade in forestry is estimated to be $13 billion annually. Kleptocrats from Malaysia to Cambodia to Honduras profit greatly from this illicit trade. Similarly, the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht has admitted to paying nearly $800 million in bribes, including to officials in 12 Latin American countries. Implicated in the Odebrecht scandal are several huge dams on the Amazon River that would displace thousands of people and produce enormous quantities of greenhouse gases. The 2017 PAS Summit characterized climate change as a grave risk to the very fabric of life on Earth. Major investments are now being made to reduce that risk. However, unless something is successfully done to combat grand corruption, kleptocrats will foreseeably steal much of that money. This will particularly injure the poor, who are disproportionately hurt by climate change and increasingly forced to migrate because of it. It should be recognized that grand corruption does not flourish in many countries because of a lack of laws. 186 countries are parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC. They all have criminal laws prohibiting extortion, bribery, money laundering, and misappropriation of national resources. They also have international obligations to enforce those laws, including against their corrupt leaders. However, those corrupt leaders enjoy impunity in their own countries because they control the police, the prosecutors, and the courts. Particularly pernicious is the power of kleptocrats, and often their partners in organized crime, to pressure judges to perform dishonestly rather than risk their lives by resisting. And I know some of those judges are in this room. Pope Francisco said several months ago that corruption is a cancer that impoverishes everyone and must be duly punished. In Laudato Si', he recognized that enforceable international agreements are urgently needed because national authorities are not always capable of enforcing their own laws, particularly against corrupt leaders, and that a global response is necessary, he said. The IACC would be just such a global response. The International Anti-Corruption Court would be staffed by elite investigators, expert prosecutors, and experienced international judges. The court would have concurrent jurisdiction to enforce national anti-corruption laws required by the UNCAC. It would be a court of last resort. Like the existing International Criminal Court, the IACC would operate on the principle of complementarity. This means that the IACC would only exercise its authority to prosecute if a country was found to be unable or unwilling to prosecute its leaders for corruption in violation of its own existing laws. The IACC would therefore assure that there is a court in which corrupt leaders will be punished. That will deter others tempted to rob their citizens and create opportunities for kleptocrats to be replaced by the election of honest, ethical officials. The proposal to create the IACC is now supported by world leaders, including former President of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, who received the Nobel Peace Prize, leading NGOs, including Human Rights Watch, Global Witness, and chapters of Transparency International throughout the world, and perhaps most significantly, by courageous young people, including leaders of the 2014 Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine, where I'm going after this meeting, who, unlike their elders, will not tolerate grand corruption as an inevitable fact of life. There is now an opportunity and an urgent need to create the International Anti-Corruption Court. Colombia and Peru have recently called upon the United Nations to establish the court and to discuss the proposal at the UN's 2021 special session on corruption. Other countries in Latin America and elsewhere are promising prospects to join this effort. This summit has the potential to make an invaluable contribution to the creation of the International Anti-Corruption Court, and by doing so, to diminish inequality, abuses of human rights, forced migration, and the existential threat of climate change. Therefore, I urge this summit to endorse the creation of the International Anti-Corruption Court in its concluding declaration. I would like to end on a personal note. Since I was a prosecutor of corrupt public officials in 1984, I have kept on my desk a crystal sculpture of Jonah and the whale. It is a reminder of how frightening it can be to be called upon to speak truth to power. I know that this is particularly true in many of your Latin American countries. However, the sculpture is also a reminder that if we, as we must, heed that call, we will prevail and improve the plight of those who desperately need and deserve justice. Heeding that call was for Jonah a lonely task. However, thanks to the community being forged at this summit, we will have the great good fortune to combat the cancer of corruption together. For that, I am deeply grateful. Thank you.